Let me find the mural that we were using. I've been locked out of mural for a while, so unfortunately, just give me a minute. But while I'm looking, I can tell you that it's only been joy and pleasure to work with Ryan. She is magical, and I've appreciated every moment with her. So I'm super grateful for her guidance with our team that is a cast of characters. Eric, you're pretty aware of that. We have 8 lovely people on our team, but speaking very different languages with different backgrounds. So that can be challenging sometimes. And the design, the service design approach has really grounded us in the work and brought clarity to parts that weren't being really thought of, if that makes sense, like pieces that we were missing because we were working in Google Docs before that and just not having a lot of detail that was revealing the things that still needed work and thinking through. So I think you, Eric and Hadassah, at least you've seen that muraling. Or I believe that Ryan shared that with you. So let me just find that one sec. And I can show you what we've been doing. I'm sorry. If you have the link, Susan, you can send it to me. But I'm looking now for it too. Let me see here. Oh yeah. Here we go. Found it. Yeah, I know. We're not great friends right now, Eric. You're right. Okay, so I found the work, and I'll share my screen, and I can walk you through how we were kind of thinking through it. All right, so let me zoom out here. So we started the work a few weeks ago, and it was really an introduction for our team in terms of service design framework. None of us had worked in it before, so it was brand new for us. Basically, Ryan helped us see that we had to have some key hypotheses around the change we want to see with this minimal viable scaffolding, we're calling it, that would help consensus have a framework to be better at self-organizing than we currently are. So we thought about interventions. This was an intervention map. And I don't really, Susan, want to take too much time walking through all the details, so I'll just point out the pieces, and then maybe if any of you are want to dig in deeper, we can go deeper. So we looked at interventions, and we looked at over time phases to the work. We also looked at we also considered the stakeholders and did some empathy mapping quickly. A lot of this work is incomplete too, by the way. But what we really dug into and was very meaningful for our team was this this log frame, so logical framework, where we fleshed out a lot of the details around the accountability system that we're talking about today. So I'll focus more on that. Susan, does that seem right to you? Just want to make sure I'm on track here.
Yep, thumbs up. Keep going.
Cool. So when thinking about an accountability system, we identified there will be agreements between a variety of individuals and teams at consensus, and each accountability agreement would contain would have to have 3 parts. One would be the agreement. The main part would be the agreement itself. Another part would be some sort of performance evaluation methodology or retroing process, or some way to measure the effectiveness of the agreement and the work that's being done, and then a conflict resolution process for the agreement as well. And so what we did was we went through those interventions and mapped them up to what the impact would be on the org. So this is pretty messy right in here, but we kind of did iterations of it that became clearer and clearer as we were working. and then presented that to what this group, which is called the OC, or operating circle, which Joe wants to call the coordinating circle, which is made up of key leaders in the organization, representatives across the organization, and yeah, so we shared that work with them. And then what we got to eventually was a set of priorities that we thought are crucial to rolling out the MVS over the course of the next quarter. And what we did was we took those priorities and we started to map them across time. So this is the blueprint of all of it, and we took our 3 priorities, which would be mesh fund, a consensus to member agreement, and then the circle foundational work, and as 3 core pieces that we need to complete first. So yeah.
Mary, can you just quickly explain mesh fund?
Sure. Okay, so let's, I think mesh fund is, where is it? I think it's over here. Yeah. Oh, this is the circle foundation. Oops, sorry, move stuff around. Mesh fund is a process by which circles receive funding, or teams receive funding, or spokes receive funding, a consensus. And it's essentially a set of criteria that you have to present in order to receive the funding. That's like a very high level view of what it is. But here are more details around mesh fund. Wait, if I can find them. Sorry, maybe it's over here. Oh, maybe it's not in here, Susan.
That's all right. Yeah, kind of like rack for circles.
Yeah, I thought that. Oh, here it is. Sorry, it is this map right here. So the first priority is mesh fund, and we did map out all of the steps that the applicants would have to go through in order to receive funding. There are a lot of dependencies in here, including dependencies related to this new coordinating circle that we're calling right now the OC, or that the mesh understands as being the OC. Yeah. Do people have questions about mesh fund, or do most people understand what it is? Oh, RAC.
At the high level, yeah. What does RAC stand for?
Resource Allocation Committee.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to pause for a minute because that was a lot, and that there aren't any questions about how we worked or how it evolved into these kind of implementation maps, I guess.
In terms of process and timeline, I just might have missed it as we were going through. Where does the segment that this group is going to work on fit into this map?
Okay, so that is the circle foundational work. So that's here, I think. Is that correct, Susan? Is this it? Yes. Oh no, consensus to member, it's here, sorry. So consensus to circle, building, we're calling them building code or foundational agreements. So that's where this work fits in. It's the third priority in the list of priorities of all of this work. It's critical, like especially what we've been working on, Susan and I, we've facilitated with this OC group, was the actual their foundational agreement as a new circle, and that's caused a lot of tension in the mesh. Right, there are a lot of people who don't who know what they're working on, who the members are. I continue to field questions on a regular basis in prepping Joe for the town hall this week around, tension that people feel around what this group is doing and is it a legitimate group. So the sooner that circle has its building code in place, the better, because then it can be, socialized, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what we found during this work is that the two entities or circles or whatever you want to call them that have been operating with no visibility or clarity or documented formation agreement was this OC, and also what we're calling the Genesis team, which is Joe himself and the other shareholders. So the premise is that when Joe started Consensus in 2014, he never wrote anything down to say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're here, this is our purpose, this is how we participate together, this is what membership looks like, et cetera, et cetera. And so in order to reach the point where Joe as the single entity is able to divest his power into the organization, that agreement needs to be those foundational premises need to be acknowledged so that the powers can be transferred. We'd call this, they're not actually transferring source, but actually transferring some of that initial momentum building energy, both to the CC and further to the mesh. And I know that JV has significant opinions about this that today probably isn't the right time to talk about, but I would like to talk about that a little bit, just quickly in a few words, Josh, expressing your tension around there being an entity called Consensus at all, just as an interesting flavor as we start diving into this.
I don't know if that would be the tension I describe it as, but it's mostly, as I see it at the moment, there's like 7 types of agreements. And I wonder if the word agreement is overloaded and would be confusing to engage with. And I see 2 distinct types. There's the agreements between peers, such as mesh member to mesh member or circle to circle, which I've often used other words for, either a promise or a commitment or a contract or something in that nature. And then there's the one which is like the umbrella agreements, which is at the moment they're presented as consensus to circle or consensus to mesh member. And I find that phrasing evokes like an us and them. And it also evokes some people who say we represent consensus and you don't, and they're the other party of that contract. And often the phrasing I've used for agreements is more a we the people kind of phrasing. We the people of consensus agree about this is the overarching umbrella for all of consensus rules, or we the people agreed this is the overarching agreement of this circle. And so that's just the main thing I wanted to name, was that there might be an opportunity to have 2 different types of things, which make it simpler for people to understand, rather than calling everything an agreement.
Yeah, I mean, we've got just for full transparency, Eric Hadassah, this team has got some proposals into, I guess, the mesh, the DNA for the various components that need facilitation. And for me, the proposal is very importantly that Joshua has the ability to facilitate the consensus entity stroke CC into actually understanding what their new responsibilities, mandates, and kind of accountabilities to the mesh. So, fingers crossed, all this will get signed off and we'll be able to do it in a coordinated, well way. But I think it feels like it's important to share with all of you, especially you, Hadassah and Eric, like the couple of months worth of hard work that's gone into getting us to where we are now. I think it's also important to note that we're now finally able to have regular sessions with Joe to help him into this. Joe is still and always will be the wild card, right? So trying to drive him as gently as possible to agreeing a starting position is really where the energy from Chris McKibben is happening right now. So don't want to like create a false sense of, right, this is it, it's done. But also I'm feeling very strongly that we need to create this momentum and proceed until apprehended as well. And I think that if we do it well, it will help the other processes. So when we think about the building code for the circles, these are the elements as Mary described. Each circle needs to be able to document. So the idea is that as an ecosystem, if the ecosystem can see itself, it can understand how to interact with less friction, with more safety, and for the possibility to actually be more experimental. And the design thinking team has done a really great job of that in your own way, in creating your own processes that you're sharing as broadly as you can. The DNA team is currently in their own process of doing this. And the idea of the work that we're proposing to do together is that every circle is going to need to create their own manifestation of these agreements. But how can we be unopinionated as we can about what that is, and just literally be the scaffolding and handing people the saws and the hammers and the cups of tea to allow them to create whatever their unique manifestation is inside. And the only requirements is that it's code compliant, that it's not going to kill anybody, right? So that like the electrics are compliant, and that there's a sewage system to get rid of the waste, and some sort of communication with the outside world. So that's like the metaphor that I enjoy using, and hopefully it's helpful for you. So I'm gonna pause there again. A lot of stuff coming out to kind of catch you guys up and get you oriented. Is it more confusing, less confusing? How are you feeling? Kate, I'd love to hear from you as well, because you're hearing a lot of this for the first time too. And Fran.
I think I've heard bits and pieces and definitely these metaphors for the last 6 months, so I'm feeling fine. I'm feeling good, and I really appreciate Josh's call to differentiate these different levels, and I think that speaks to my tension around so many similar sounding things, and I definitely want to support, the framing of these umbrella level agreements, and then, through the SO 101 trainings we've done, we had such a focus on the language of agreements, especially in the last 3 cohorts. So, and we did use social contracts, we did use agreements. So I feel like that's already there. And just saying everything's an agreement is slightly risky. So I'd love to be on that track with whoever's in there thinking about that more.
Yeah, I really echo that as well. Oh, go for it, Mary.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Kate, there's like a whole level of like how this is my son Charlie. Sorry, you guys. It's no school this week. So I know, right? So we're thinking, there's a whole level of like how we frame this work for the mesh, right? For the regular people, individuals that are working every day, so that this makes total sense. Right? This isn't completely like yet another level of crazy language that we have in the mesh. Yeah. So, I mean, there's been a lot of feedback around the recent comm that went out from Joe about the language that's being used, and if people really understand what he's talking about. So we don't want to add to that by any means, simplify.
Yeah, and I think so for me, like the full overview is still like a bit much, because obviously I'm a bit newer to this, so there's a lot of things that just look like words to me, and they're not actual things behind it, because I haven't interacted with them. But I think that if we can really just be clear on what piece we're starting with, which, to the instruction of working with each specific circle to help them figure out what they want their agreements to be, based on the minimal building code that they need to comply with, that seems super straightforward to me. So I think that's great. And so I think just not always getting lost in right away thinking about the 6 other relationships that we're trying to define at once. Like, it just seems like that's going to be a lot. And I think you've probably already thought through this much more. But one thing I wanted to mention is maybe there's actually a possibility to reduce the number of the amount of differences that we need to have between all those agreement types, because maybe sometimes they could actually just be fractal, or basically we have the same rules just at different levels, and they just apply in those different relationships. I don't know if that's realistic, but maybe we can simplify some things.
I mean, on some things like code of conduct. So we've got an overarching sample code of conduct, and not code of conduct, conflict resolution system. So like the default could be, right, we've got a great conflict resolution system here. If you want something different, great, but this is work that you don't have to do if you're thumbs up with this, for example.
But I think there's also potential within the circles to actually become more self-organizing and develop a lot if they actually utilize different parts of the building code if they co-create it. As we know from experience, if you just consume something and if you're just handed something, it's not a living part of your culture. It just becomes, the building code that we never ever think about. So I'm like really interested in, yes, like let's copy and paste where applicable, but also how can we facilitate as the group facilitating this so it becomes more than that.
Yeah, I think I like that idea as well. To me, the idea of here's a bunch of agreements which you inherit by default, and you need to actively do something to overwrite them if you want a different conflict resolution process, for example, has some merit. And I think Kate's point about the developmental benefit of creating things not from scratch but actively choosing them. So I could imagine a system which is like, here's our recommended starter kit, like a yeast in a sort of brewing exercise, and it might just be a decision-making agreement. This is what we suggest is your starting decision-making agreement. Here's a list of agreements we want you to get done. Like, here's the spec for the building code. Here's what we mean by electrics or plumbing or whatever. And then there's an actual effort on the part of the circle to say, we're not going to change it, we're just going to use it, or we're going to actually tweak it and use a different one. But they know what the goal is. So I like that approach. I'm curious about, do you have a sense of what the building code spec looks like? Like, if we move away from the metaphor, what was the language you used for the actual agreements you'd suggest for a circle?
Yeah, we do have that, and it was in the document that I sent yesterday.
So do you mean the email or in
the
an
email.
attached document?
Yeah, the email. So if you scroll down to number 2, the Circle Foundation
here.
agreements. So the building code requirements as they articulate a team's purpose, values, governance, decision making, and roles, communication systems, accountability and feedback processes, conflict resolution processes, onboarding process, offboarding process.
Yeah, and it seems
I'm
to me.
really curious about. Oh,
Go ahead, Asa.
Go for it.
yeah, thank you. I'm really curious about the use of all of these code elements on a couple levels. I'm curious if we know that we need all of these elements, like how we know all these elements are needed and what they might roll up into. If there is, I think to Kate's point, I'm definitely in agreement that there is like a pedagogical value in people developing their own codes, but I'm curious if we can maybe leverage some of the like software engineering thinking that is present in the mesh and think about variables or modules that you customize, right? Like language people might already be familiar with, but to use this idea of like, there's a pre-programmed set of variables that like is in this base code, and you can change the variables if you want, or you can customize, or you can take this base layer of code and just build the skin or whatever we want to call it on top of that. Like there's some people have the sense that we've engaged them, right? And they're deeply participating in building the thing, but that they don't have to invent the programming language itself. Like I'm just thinking about the tension and wondering how many variables we actually need. So maybe that's my question. Like in terms of the like, what are we calling them? Elements, purpose, values, governance. Like if we know that we need all of those.
Is that coming from a place of like something in the pit of your stomach that's telling you don't think we need all of those?
I think we can cut from those ones. And I feel like saying something which is like, because there's building code, which is like, you must have this or you're not compliant. And if you don't have this, then we have a problem with you and we're going to send inspectors, or that kind of activity. And then there's another kind of level, which is like, here's our recommended standards. If you do this, we think you're better than if you don't. And I think differentiating them between must-haves and nice-to-haves, one, in terms of having them at all, and two, in terms of the depth they're articulated, might be a useful exercise for that list. Off the top of my head, I haven't thought deeply on it, but I can't see any which is like, oh, I think you're really missing something in that list. But I want to consider that more.
Eric?
I was wondering if Consensus Core, or whatever that circle is called, has this already.
No, And so that's part of what we're working on. So what we've done, they have created, like Mary and I facilitated Chris, Zahava, and Lee to a point of their formation agreement, which is the bare minimum that they need to actually put themselves forward as a circle, but they still need to do all this other work as well.
The reason I ask is, in part, if you look at the history of people writing constitutions from the political science perspective, no one starts from scratch. It's way too hard, right? So everything is building on something else, and yet we don't have a bunch of political scientists sitting around in the mesh. So I think starting them from scratch seems really, really hard. And if the core or whatever we're calling them get something together, and then we can say, you can use this, or in your agreement, say the parts that you're changing, that seems like it's going to be far easier.
Yeah, I think that we do have that. And I also think that we've got enough really good examples. So we've got the design thinking team, your kind of core agreement process. We've got the Pegasus team core agreement process. We've got the process for creating the formation agreement. So I think that we do have enough that we can cobble together from pre-existing as a baseline, as you say, Eric, so that we're not starting from absolute scratch.
I also think, leaning on the idea of borrowing from programming metaphors, I think there's a whole bunch which can be really applicable in this context. And I think a big one is also the open sourcing nature of them. The idea of, here are patterns, here's what other people have done, here's a list of 5 different decision-making agreements, which ones do you like, which ones do you don't. I think that's a really useful exercise for teams to go through, but definitely +1 for, we wouldn't be suggesting people sit down and from a blank piece of page write these out.
Yeah, I just wanted to +1 the having examples of different teams and how they've already created their building code, because I think also having more than one to be able to compare, and then that will help people position themselves, like what things they agree with and what they want to maybe change. Because and I just think that in that list of the criteria that maybe there's some where it's like, actually that, for instance, I think conflict resolution is an example where maybe you just want to take something that's already been done and been tried out, and then you'll tweak it as you go. And then there's a few criteria where maybe you're more likely to really want to customize it heavily. So I think doing that differentiation that JV was suggesting would be helpful.
Mary, is this we've been doing this work in some semi-isolation. Is any of this conversation, like broadening conversation, pinging anything for you at the minute?
Well, it does. Certainly, I felt like it was long and challenging to get Zahava, Lee, not so much Chris, a little, he's so familiar, it was fine, but to get them to their heads around this work, so I think that's right. I think that's spot on around, having things that people can pre-work and like things that they can choose from, or having it be modular to a certain degree would really serve us. Yeah, and the question that's coming up for me is that, so if you have a team and they're really unfamiliar with these concepts at all, these concepts, then what? Do we need? Is there something else that needs to happen that helps them get ready to do this work, right? And so that there's a mutual understanding of what the work is, and also so that they're prepared to do it. But I don't know, Eric, I would love to hear what you think, because of what you were just saying before about, things were always, built from other things that were, structured before it. So maybe not, I don't know. Maybe it's not necessary to have that.
I wonder if we can define the value propositions for the circles and the mesh members in order to do the work. Sorry, Kate, I see I interrupted you.
Eric, do you want to respond? I think that's a really great point also, Hadassah.
I think the example I always give is, it doesn't matter how you fire someone until you need to fire someone, right? And then all of a sudden you really need to know how to do that. And so putting a little energy ahead of that and practicing those skills. But there's always just got to be some sort of trigger point. So I would say, yeah, are they going to wrap their heads fully around the historical evolution of decision-making processes in Western civilization, right? That's probably not that important. But yeah, I would sign up for that course in a second. But for all the normal people in the mesh, yeah. Go ahead. I think that we could probably frame it in, here's what other circles have had to do, when they've had, and firing to me is always like, that's the gateway drug.
So I feel like we do have a lot of champions dotted through the mesh who've been through Team Foundations and SO 101 who have interfaced with all of these concepts. And once we kick off our alumni groups, we can talk to them about this stuff. And then we'll have, these little nodes throughout the mesh, hopefully in every single circle, that actually a couple of people. And then maybe like if we do encounter a circle where no one has any familiarity, they could do a Team Foundations or, have a bit of time beforehand actually discussing this stuff in a bit more depth, because we do have a lot of content on this, on the notion of agreements, a lot of history on where they came from, and that kind of interfaces directly with decision-making content. Josh, do you agree? Have anything to say?
Sorry, I was busy copying that book link in the chat. Yeah, I think there's a lot of content there. I also think that I think the best way I've seen to get people's attention on learning stuff is to do something practical. And I think having a very clear task, which is we want to help you get a set of agreements which serve your team well, is a really useful and simple thing to do. When I've been working with teams in the mesh, I find decision making is often one of the ones they're very interested in. I also find feedback is another one that people are usually not doing and want to do better. I also like feedback because it's quite an easy one to get quick gains from. I'd see, and this is just looking at this list, team values would be one which would seem further away for me. Onboarding and offboarding, I think, are a bit variable. And yeah, it feels to me like things like roles and governance, I just go straight for decision making on that point. So I'd be really, I'm not sure what the rest of the session is and how much we're going to get our hands dirty. But I really like the direction of a list of agreements and getting a sense of here's ones we're going to give you most of them. Here's some we're going to give you none of them. Here's some we're going to give you a list of options, which is more of a paint by numbers approach. And I think you can actually frame them up differently so that it's actually an optimized learning experience for people going through it, as well as a productive use of their time.
I'd love to hear from Hadassah or Eric. I love the way that you're currently framing the work that you do as products. I'd love to kind of put you on the spot and just ask you to, with maybe a tiny bit of reflection, kind of think out loud about how you'd productize this work and where you'd start.
My first thought, given that it's tax season in the US right now, is TurboTax, because at the end of the TurboTax product, right, is a form that you send to the United States government where you have your return on it, and they ask you, and you say how much money you owe them or how much money the US government owes you. And there's a very specific set of questions that are important, but it doesn't look like a form of, or like one of those really complicated government forms. And it kind of highlights what's important or what's not. So that's sort of my hot take on
it. I'm looking at the consensus mesh backend right now of Sobel, just to try to figure out where these elements might go. And I don't know if Sobel is getting built out more, but I see place for goals, place for roles, place for agreements. But it's just sort of like add agreement, add section, like it's pretty vague and modular. The thing that I'm thinking about is when we would do kicking off like a participatory budgeting process, we had kind of similar, like it was a facilitator's guide that essentially walked the group of people through the types of decisions first it was like facilitator privilege, here's how I think you should make decisions. Okay, great, this is how you're going to make decisions going forward, and then walk people through the types of decisions they had to make. So it was productized in the sense that it like specified what had to be determined. And then that document was sort of like a central, it was part of the central repository of things that were referred to regularly. So it had high value content in it such that people returned to it when they needed to make decisions, which they had to often. And as we've been thinking about productizing the way that we do product development, the series of product development that we're working, we've been taking a sort of user-focused approach, trying to figure out at what stage the team that we're working with is at. So if it's a team that already has gone through some of these decision-making processes, figuring out mission vision, figuring out roles, right? Like they will ideally be able to just plug what they've already done into the system, right? Rather than having to like go through something all over again. So I wonder that the way we were productizing things is making me think about how modular the actual process of getting teams to do this needs to be, such that people who've already gotten certain parts done don't have to repeat work.
Do you think that could be just part of a pre-deployment, pre-implementation or pre-audit, or do you think that it will be part of the process for each team, for each engagement, or does it not matter?
There's probably value in having people talk through it in whatever process we devise. I would imagine pedagogically and in terms of buy-in, sort of refining and re-agreeing to things. I don't know, Eric or anyone else. What do you all think?
Kate had her hand.
Different point.
Well, I wonder so maybe my assumption, Susan, when you asked, what's the product development process? Generally, a product acts independent from the human beings who created it. So separate from a facilitated process, right? Is there a way that they essentially self-service or opt into it in some way? That's where my brain was going at it. So then at that point, the team can have the conversations without us.
That's what I hear about in terms of writing out a facilitation guide, and having here's some documentation which someone in a team could look at and start to initiate themselves. Does that match what you think of with the product?
Yeah, product can be a facilitation guide if it can be used by the attendant audience without us.
Can we talk about the users a bit more? Because from my experience, working with people in the mesh is that they're so overloaded all the time that a DIY menu is just not going to fly. They'll need some hand holding, they'll need some facilitation, they'll want that. And there are some teams that have done, in circles or spokes especially, that have done more on this because they've needed to. They've actually hit the point where they've had to fire someone, so they've done that work. I don't know. I want to talk more about what kind of circles we're going to see, what their similarities are, what their differences are, so that as, you know, and we put our design thinking caps on, we can start to think about different constraints and then to group them circle by circle. Oh, these are the circles that are like each other over here. Start testing in different, and, you know, doing our first engagements with like completely different circles so that we can bring up a lot of data about how to go forward. And I'm wondering who the best person is to start like giving some use cases to us, or just for us to start brainstorming about that, and if that's a good idea. But Susan, she's kind of gone.
She had to get the door, sorry. She'll be back in.
Okay. Anyone else?
In the email Susan sent, there was a spreadsheet of 20 circles.
But I think the numbers are off. I have to see with her where she got that from, because I'm not sure it's accurate. And now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, so looking at that list, you know, is Catalyst, right? Cool. I've met a few of those people, kind of have a vague idea of what they do. Are they quite similar to the Ambassadors Circle? What are the patterns and similarities that we can start to draw out so that we have a bit more? I'm wondering, Susan, if there's a good use of time given your goals for this session and what we need to get to by the end.
Yeah, I would propose something different. I would propose thinking about how we start thinking about what we're designing for. I think that this conversation about the circles and their various personalities is important. But I'm wondering if a good use of this time would be maybe to split into working groups, either duos or triads, to do kind of divide and conquer on this. So that's one thing that I would find interesting. I just want to loop back for a second before I lose the thread on the conversation about the product, i.e. the facilitator's guide and this facilitating process. The way that I, in a perfect world, like to approach these processes is that we're actually building our artifacts as we go. So yes, absolutely, this first round and probably all of these existing circles are going to need hands-on, very intimate and specific facilitation. But if we're creating the products that we leave behind as part of this, it means that in 2 years or 3 years, maybe when none of us are left, at least these will be the foundational documents, as Eric was specifying, so that people don't need to start over again. That was kind of my thinking around the product stuff. So looping back around to Kate's question, can you maybe I'm just not understanding what you're sensing is why this is the most important work we could be doing together right now.
I'm not saying that. I'm just pointing out some questions I'm still holding around, like what to expect when we start interfacing with circles. And if we can be smarter in how we work by identifying this bunch of circles that are quite similar, that may have, just the need for similar content. They've already bumped into a few of these things before. They've already got some building codes. It's just starting to make sense of the users in a way that I haven't heard yet, or just even start talking about them. But I'm totally up for not doing that right now. In terms of, but I do think we need to start getting to a few more action points.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess that's a question, right? If we look at this list of circles, and especially directing this to Hadassah, Mary, and Eric, do we feel like we know enough about any of these circles to be able to kind of surface some of their patterns or some of their personality attributes? Or maybe is this signaling that the first piece of work that we need to do is maybe just create a little questionnaire and divide up the circles and do a little bit of an audit first?
Yeah, I can only speak to a very few circles. So it would be very challenging to try to name a pattern across all of them.
I do like starting with some research or ground ourselves in some data before we get started. I like that approach.
Could there be some kind of simple self-audit of just making a type form with a few questions that could be answered in a few minutes that we send to all the circles to assess themselves?
Or a subset of the of Joshua's forget what you call it, the health check. Just like 2 or 3 of those 2 or 3 or 4 of those dimensions.
I think the health check's a bit harder, and it usually needs more of the circle to engage. So it's a more expensive a way to get information. And the same with the type form. I think it's cheapest from our point of view, but it's also probably less quality. The other one would be calls with the circles and getting on the phone with 15 minutes. Can I ask you some questions? Guided survey approach. I think whatever the approach, the idea of getting more data about the circles feels like a good line of inquiry to me.
Cool. So what I'm hearing, what's coming up for me strongly is that I see 2 kind of pieces of pre-work that would be really valuable. One is this circle audit type form thing, and the other is Hadassah's value prop question. So I'm wondering if there's a third, or if maybe we could, as the next immediate action from this session, break into a couple of groups, go away with those two actions.
Tell me more about the value prop.
Yeah, to me, a value proposition is like a user-centered way of saying, why does this matter to this person or this circle? Why does this circle sort of want to go through the process of defining roles, and if they don't know why they would use it, they're going to be more unlikely to go through with it.
I mean, could that even be something
So
that,
to me, value proposition is like, why do they value the outcome, or what value will they get from the outcome?
you go, Eric, and then I'll go.
Yeah, I'm curious how much of a hard stop Joe's really putting on funding for circles. Or is this going to be like, hey, yeah, we have to really convince you why it's important to be self-organized? Or are we saying Joe's not going to give you any more money unless you become self-organized?
That's a hypothesis, right? There's things that need to line up for that to happen, right? So the budget is still being massaged. And the way that I understand it, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, is as soon as that budget is agreed, then everything goes into the mesh fund pot, and then circles need to start going through the mesh fund process to get those approved budget funds released. Is that the way you're seeing it, Mary?
That is the way I'm seeing it, but I think there'll be groups that don't need to go through it, and I'm not clear on who. And then what's going to motivate those groups, these circles, to have all this in order if they're not going to go through this. Yeah. So
I think we need, I know it's going to be hard to get this clarity, but if we don't present with clarity on this as the people kind of leading them through this process, we're going to not look very cool.
Couldn't we live without that clarity? Like in terms of, so if there is a hard stop and you need to be compliant before you get funding, level of motivation, okay, that's one situation. But if it's not, if it's some people get a free pass and other people get more pressure or whatnot, then our work is still fairly similar in that we need to identify a good set of agreements, a process for people to get to them, and we need them to serve the circles well.
Kate, I think that we can speak to a level of authority and clarity, just amongst ourselves. If we can get aligned on the purpose for this and just feel like we can do it with authenticity, I think that's probably the best that we can expect. But we might be surprised, right? Joe might drop down out of the sky and say, "This is the best fucking thing I've ever seen," and everybody must follow it. But he might not.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Susan, I didn't hear what you said at the end.
I said that Joe might drop out of the sky and say, "This is the best fucking process I've ever seen," or he might not.
But could we say that we do think that the intention is that is the process in the future?
It is.
And that every new circle that gets created should be following that. So that is what we're trying to get to.
And certainly that's the kind of validation that we've got to the person who, to all intents and purposes, is as close to the right hand of Joe as in Chris. So
we've got enough assumptions to write the kind of, do we have like a paragraph that explains this that we can give to a circle and say, this is what we're doing, this is why, tell us, when do you want to start? Mm-hmm. And then we'll just test that, like what kind of responses are we getting? Do we need to have more clarity? Are they like, okay, let's not do way more work than is necessary?
I think we can do a little bit of both. I think that we can have some like 2 or 3 questions, like you said, Kate, and then also give that option, right? Yep, makes sense. We've been waiting for this. We need help now. Let's get started. But I'm just wondering if the best use or an interesting use of our last half hour together, and not to put Hadassah, you or Eric on the spot, but wondering if you'd be willing to take us through this value prop creation process, or the way that you do it from your perspective, in 15 or 20 minutes, and then that could form the basis for the paragraph that Kate is asking for, and then we wrap in a short type form for that, and then that's it. Can we do a Rumio on this, that proposal, for the next half hour? We need a visual confirmation one way or the other, Kate. Thank you. All right. You're in our hand. We're in your hands, Eric and Hadassah.
Are we going to mural or are we doing this verbally? Hadassah, that's a question aimed at you.
We have a Google Doc. Maybe we should just hang out.
You want to do it in there?
Yeah.
Let's do it in there. I don't know if mural's working again. I saw all the chatter about that.
It is working.
Okay,
Thank
good.
goodness. I'm going to see what I have on my desktop about value propositions to throw in to yield mural. This may or may not confuse us at a higher level. We're not going to fill out this whole canvas in half an hour, but this is going to be a framework to think about creating a value proposition. I want to collaborate with Eric here. Eric, I would imagine maybe taking like, a quick explanation of each side and then like one sort of segment from each of these might help us describe the value proposition, but I'm open to doing it anyway. What do you think, or how might you change that?
I think the fast pass, we have 25 minutes left, so sort of like a fast pass, 5 to 10 minutes all the way through it, and then kind of a reflection on it. I'm guessing we're not going to end up very far apart. Does that make sense? Okay. We said Google Doc. Did you share something, or will you share something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in the Google Doc that we've been taking notes, that Anonymous Panda has been kindly taking notes. I threw in just something called the value proposition canvas. So what I am going to so I'm going to propose. So, and I can also share my screen to make this easy to see if anyone is not on. Okay. The value proposition canvas looks like this. Here's the 1-minute description, and then we're going to move into some collaborative activities. On the right-hand side, yes, you see the user, the person, or sort of representation of a circle, but a human being who has to get some things done, wants to accomplish things, has pains or problems. On the other side, you see a square on the left. And these are the types of things that could be done to help that user, that person, gain things, avoid pains. And there's products and services that are like, what are the types of ideas, right? That might allow people to gain things or avoid pain. So my proposal is going to be that we take about 5 minutes. I will put here in the Google Doc user. Woo, yay. And below that, we're going to have gains, pains, and jobs, which is just like, what are the things that they care about that they have to get done? And that we collaboratively in this Google Doc add in just the things that we think are the gains that members of the circles or these people are trying to accomplish, pains, things that they, want to avoid, jobs. Right. And in coming up with these words, we're going to come up with we're going to see some patterns and we're going to find some language for the thing that we want to write. So my suggestion is that we take about 4 minutes and just collaboratively write in this document, and then come back and do the same thing for the other side, take 4 minutes, and then we'll see what we have.
Cool. Can you stop sharing, Hadassah, so I can type on my machine, please? Or I can do that. I can do that anyway. Yeah, why don't you share again, and then I'll just exit my full screen. Thanks. Sorry, I wasn't thinking.
So we've got a little bit under 2 minutes on this part, then we'll move to the next chunk. All right, so finish up your sentence and then move on to the next section, which is about what we call the value propositions. So what are the things we can help people to achieve their gains? What are the pain relievers? What are the things you could put in place to help relieve some of these pains? So take a minute and read what was written, and then we will collaboratively fill in the doc. Oh, about a minute and a half left. All right, so that is time. And then maybe I will hand it over to Eric to think about some patterns and conversions we can pull out of this.
Thanks, Adasa. Finding patterns in Google Docs is the win right here. Let's have a look back at the top, shall we? So we're going to be under users. And I put a little note there. I said maybe this is the steward or leader of a circle, or maybe it's just a member of a circle. But maybe our research can help answer some of these questions. My experience is that the leaders are sometimes not the most self-aware. So gains, can I get a volunteer just to read these out? So we can all hear them in our heads rather than just seeing them on our screens. Okay.
Sure.
Thanks.
Are we loud?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
You're good. Yeah, we're under gains.
Yes, okay. Clarity on how to get funding. Alignment in the team around purpose and objectives. I want funding for my team circle. I want my darn projects to move forward already. I want to not fight with my colleagues. Feeling like I finally understand what the fuck this self-organizing thing means. Clarity and a basis for clear communication. A starting point for iteration to reflect what we really need. A way to see ourselves. Conflict resolution and offboarding processes there create security. I love working with my team. Recognition for being awesome. The way our team organized is helping others improve.
Okay, what I would like you to do now, thank you for reading, is go put a star next to any of these bullet points or these thoughts that resonates with how you think people will think about us or about the work that we're doing. So not what you personally think is important, but about how someone you think in the mesh would resonate with this. And there could be more than one star. So feel free to, this is going to give us a sense of who thinks what is interesting or important. So, and there's no limit on stars, use as many as you want.
But only one star per thing per person, right?
No, any number of stars per thing per person as you wish.
Okay.
I mean, don't put 1,000.
I was just away for a second. Is this for everything?
Just for game.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can put as many stars as you want per line. You have no limit on stars. You have no limit on lines. What we're trying to do is see, from the perspective of our potential user, which of these lines do you think would resonate with them? Because the big thing about a value prop is it doesn't have anything to do with us. It has everything to do with our marketing and how we're going to attract people to our product or service or offering. Yep, so as many stars as you like, anywhere you like. And I'm going to start bubbling some things to the top. Any other thoughts? What I'm seeing from our quick starring experiment is stuff about conflict, stuff about what it means to actually get fired or offboarded, as we're kindly saying it, and how a team gets funding, right? Because the second and the third are both funding. So we have conflict. I'm just highlighting some words that I'm seeing as interesting. Funding and funding. And then here we go. Fighting is conflict again. And okay.
Fighting and money.
Excuse me?
Everything's about fighting and money.
Yeah, such is life. That is what when the facilitators did all this work, we're like, really? This is just about how we spend our time and money. We should just call it that and stop calling it self-organizing. Just be like, how do I spend my time and money? Okay, so back on point. Any thoughts on this other than what we've just bolded? It seems like there's some consensus around us about what we think our users would gain from this process. Anything else?
Yeah, I think one other thing that's coming up for me is something around when we're inviting people to join and when people are joining, that, okay, right, I can see what this is from day one.
Yeah, and then maybe there's like
yeah, go ahead.
role to like a purpose alignment thing. There's that alignment, the team purpose, but there's a like personal fitting in how I fit in. I mean, I know that this wouldn't necessarily create the love. But the love comes from feeling like you're fitting in and like you're aligned and stuff.
No, I think that resonates with me. Is I hear that from folks a lot. Like, I was hired to do this job, but like I'm not doing anything like that job. So those types of conversations, I think, I think will resonate with you. I agree.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on gains for our users?
Personally, I would have put a -* on the conflict, just in terms of what I've seen in the mesh that I haven't seen as many people motivated by. But I appreciate that into your portion.
A -*? I don't have one of those, but how about I put a minus?
I know, I was just
I put a lot of stars in there. I'm going to take 2 away, actually.
Okay. All right, we're not going to settle it right now. So we're just kind of trying to bubble up. We have 9 minutes remaining, so I'm going to speed us along. Pains. Can I have someone read this out just so we can all hear it in our heads? And we're going to double task or multitask, I guess. Please put stars as you're listening so we can go a little faster.
Right, I can go quickly. I want to fit in and understand how I fit in. Lack of clarity on relationship to consensus and how to get funding. No clear decision-making process. We don't know how to collaborate with other circles. I'm not sure how decisions are made in my circle. In our team, only one person manages the budget. It's unclear to me how to get support for the work I need to help others to help me with. I don't know how things work in my circle. Our team leader doesn't lead, and I'm not sure who to go to for help or how to address it. A few people do all the dishes, internal work. Love that from, I think it was Josh Kreitz. Following suboptimal processes by making them up. So how do I fire someone? Conflict and tension brewing and no process to deal with it. No clarity on where I should communicate. I have no idea on how to do this, too much to unlearn and learn. This isn't the job I'm paid for. If you want me to create governance, you need to pay me more money. A vote isn't enough. Can I just vote in a digital platform and do it that way? 10 hours. Feeling lost and not knowing how to get oriented. I'm getting harassed and don't know what to do. Everyone is just doing what they want to do, i.e. anarchy, not self-organizing.
Awesome. Thank you for that rapid speed reading. Continue starring. I'm just going to start bubbling things up to the top. But there's no need to stop starring. Okay. Oh, sorry. There seems to be more. Now as people got to the bottom, I'm going to keep moving things. So, wow, there's a lot of pain here. Let's see. If I was going to summarize it, it's we have a lack of leadership, inside the circles, people don't know how decisions are made or feel shut out from those decisions. Governance feels like a separate thing than what I was hired to do, right? I'm an engineer, I'm a designer, I'm a whatever I am. And I don't really, like, this takes a lot of time. And yeah, I would say those are the things that kind of stuck out to me. Anyone have something else that stands out to them based on our starring? No? Okay. So then I'll take it that I did an excellent job summarizing. So let's go on to what gains, pains. Oh, jobs to be done. Perfect. I'll read these out just to keep us moving. And once again, star if it resonates with you. Remember, our user is someone inside a circle or maybe the leader of a circle, depending on our perspective. I need to finish my product stat or I won't keep getting funding. If Joe says I have to do it, I guess I have to do it. Or do I? For a lead director, I'm anxious and focused to want to get my circle settled and back to work. Improving my team processes, document, harvest, reflect, create, iterate, ensure that what's created is a living. Anything stand out? What stands out to me is that maybe we don't know what jobs need to be done by our users, or maybe we don't have enough clarity on what our users are. Because I thought we had a lot of gains and pains, and there seems to be less going on here for jobs to be done.
I maybe wasn't completely clear on what that meant, jobs to be done. So
yeah, as an example, if Joe said you can't get funding unless you have a circle agreement in place, my jobs to be done as a steward or a leader of a circle would be to align my circle around this type of document that we're asking them to create. Cool. Right? That's something that needs to happen. Another thing that might need to, like if you're in brand design, you might need to say, well, we need to have a way of triaging all of the requests that we're getting. All these things are jobs that someone inside a circle will need to do.
Yeah.
But I think what we're missing is clarity on who exactly is our user.
Gotcha.
That'd be my read on this. Any other reads on it?
I think I was also under time pressure when I got to that section, so I spent more on the first two than that one.
Fair enough.
I agree with the lack of clarity.
Does anyone have a job that they want to throw in now based on all the things that they've seen? Okay, let's speed along because we're rapidly approaching the end of time. So value prop. Once again, so same situation as always, but now we're on the other side of our chart, right? So we're no longer talking about the user specifically. We're talking about what value we can create for that user. So some of the gains, and please star anything. And if you didn't get a chance because you're under time pressure, please feel free to add in anything you want. Some starting positions examples to share for inspiration and or integration. Consistency in how we orient the pieces and hence the big, I don't know what that means, blob, CS blob?
Consensus.
Consensus blob, got it, thank you. Yes, I know what to do when Voldemort and I disagree on a big issue. Lovely. We can focus on products, users, and protocol and not learning how to deal with each other. Okay. Based on the starring, it looks like kind of all these things resonated. But I think since there's a lot of stars for protocol, like we can do our job and not do this other stuff, that resonates with one of the pains that we identified. And then some starting positions or examples, right? We talked about that earlier in this call. We think that would resonate with folks. Okay, anything else? Any other thoughts as I rapidly move us to the end? Okay, products and services. So what are we actually gonna, not just what the game will be, right? So the game is separate from whatever we make, right? There's lots of ways to produce that game, but here's some of the ways that we're thinking about it. So circle by circle handbook, outlining processes and agreements, set up the meetings for a whole team at outset, pre-created Sobel fields for easy entry, like the IRS form, only enter once, interactive guide that takes you through the key questions and steps for defining your building code, GitHub book resource that participants participate in creating. So yeah, just throw some stars. Thanks for your attention to the very last moment. We might not make it. but I guess we can revisit if we need to. Based on what I'm seeing, doesn't look all that different than what we've been talking about already. So that one of the key values of doing this value prop analysis is that we can see like, okay, the products and services, we kind of decided ahead of time what those were going to be. And now, does all this other stuff support that? Or should we be more creative and take the pains and gains that are underlying these products and services and come up with something else? I don't have an answer to that. I'm just highlighting it. And we're out of time. I don't want to hold people over. Do we have a next step, Susan?
So, to my mind, the next step, my proposal for a next step is breaking into 2 groups. One looking at doing the very short audit document, and then the other working on like consolidating this into some key messages.
Okay, we have 2 groups. One's going to be like a research group.
Yep.
And the other one is going to be like a marketing group.
Yeah.
It would also be good just to like, everyone let this percolate and maybe circle back to it. Like, I know that for me, that would be helpful. It was quite intense.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering how we might do that. I mean, my preference is always to have synchronous time, but also recognize that might not always be possible. I mean, Fran, Kate, JB, me, I don't know what time our sessions are starting, but if we could have one other session with this group, maybe doing an 8 a.m. This week would be helpful for me, but I need to circle back to you to see if that's okay.
Well, let's also just have a chat in person for 15 minutes tomorrow over coffee.
Cool.
As well. Okay.
All right. So can we just quickly, can we stop sharing the screen and maybe do a checkout? And just to help me, the question could be, what do each of us see as our desired next step?
I can start checking out fun process. I want to talk to a couple of circles. That's it.
I'll go. My checkout is not, for those of you who work with me, it's not going to be very surprising. It's that I don't think we have enough clarity on who our user really is and what they want. We have a high level directive. This is always how it starts in big corporations of any kind. And how is it going to resonate with the actual people, and who are those people? Like, are we targeting leaders? Are we targeting like any random person inside a circle? That seems crazy. So thinking more about that and what we're actually going to do for those people seems pretty important.
Sorry, can I just make one amendment to that and maybe say which of the working streams do you want to be in, the research one or the value prop one?
Okay, I would like to check out and be in the research group.
Hey.
Kind of both, but I'll say research.
I'll put you in both.
Yeah, so I agree with what Eric just said. I feel like handicapped by not having the answers to the questions around the users, and so need that work to kind of help us, design. We can't really, otherwise we're just making too many assumptions. I think so. I could propose like in the research, as part of the research group, doing setting up a small test group. Like if Kate, you wanted to, coordinate with that, we could put together, a few circles that we wanted to just test with and see how to position it. Oh, who's going to go next?
Hey, it's Hadassah. I am thinking about how teams are going to use this at the end of the pipeline, the sort of like end-to-end cycle of we have these agreements, now what do we do with them? So I will hop into the research group because I want to look at Sobel, and I have some questions about where this stuff's supposed to go. And I can also do some research talking with the design circle operations folks who I know are asking these questions right now.
Yeah, I think I resonate with everything that's been said and feel like I need some more sense-making time. And I guess was generally more drawn to the research group, which it seems like everyone is in. And I'm wondering if maybe actually there's sequential, like maybe we can't necessarily do both at the same time because we need the information from the research to understand better what the users are.
Yeah, there's a reason, and that makes sense to me, although I feel like having a starting point for the proposition is good, so maybe I will do a little bit of independent jamming on that just to see what I can come up with. And I guess I'll be taking point on making our joint communication and our internal process and cadence and rhythms going.
And when we get together, I guess this week, I saw in the email, Susan, that there was a request for our teams to figure out our inter-team agreements and how we're going to work together by the end of the week. So I just want to lift that up because we haven't talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's in our internal sprint planning for completion by the end of next week, but the end of this week would be good too.
Oh, I might have misread that. I saw end of this week.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's great.
I've had spotty connection over the chat, so I'm a bit lost.
We're with Joshua for the rest of the week, so we can fill him in. Great. I'll circle back with the notes, some proposed times for our next session, and Mary, I'll talk to you offline about the DNA side of the agreement, because I think that's what Hadassah is asking for. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye. Bye.
Bye.